We're going to go to courses and we're going to, oh my, what's going on here?
Return notebooks at the beginning of class tomorrow or Friday?
Say that again.
Return notebooks at the beginning of class tomorrow or Friday?
You need your notes tomorrow. And you're going to turn in your sketchbooks Friday.
We need our notes tomorrow?
Yeah, you'll have 2 minutes to look at your notes tomorrow. On Friday, you're going to turn in your sketchbooks so I can grade them. Say that again. Detailed drawing, yes, it should be in your sketchbook. Yes, and you should upload your article.
Oh, that's all mine? No, I thought that was like actual. That's why I said that's the slide.
Why does it look like this?
The topic?
What the hell? What the hell happened to Schoology? Weird. All right, I'll have to deal with that later. Why is it all different? All right. Okay, so once you get into Schoology, you're going to go into Unit 2. And the review is right there, and the slide ID review is right there, and the exam review is right there. And there's also, this is where you will upload your Unit 2 article. And then I also put in the article assignment to refresh your memory of how to do an article. People are still turning in articles from like 1912 and 1873 and things like that. All right, and then let's first go to the slide ID. Real easy. You guys know how this works. There are 20 works of art that I want you to memorize. So therefore, you need to make flashcards of these 20 works of art. And it is just rote memorization. And on this part of the test, I will be asking you to, I'll show you 5 works of art and from this list, and you will need to give me the title, the date, and the era that it comes from. I have first and fifth period, and so I'm tired of the first class that takes a test telling the second class that what pictures I'm doing. So I have bought a 20-sided die, and I will roll the die for each picture. So it could be any of these 20. It might be the same ones that they have. It might be different ones. All right. So don't know until we take the test. All right. Are there any questions about the slide ID? You get 5 extra points if you make flashcards and turn them in. All right. Now going back to Unit 2. And then let's take a look at the exam review, which I have pulled up as a Word document. Let's try the other one. All right. So it is organized by, we have Greek art, and then we get into Etruscan art, and then Roman art, and then late antiquity. So let's start going through this. I want you to know what the Acropolis is, and I want you to know things about the Acropolis that I taught. Oh, well, the Acropolis is the highest point of the city. I'm getting Parthenon mixed up with this. The Acropolis is the highest point of a city. The Acropolis at Athens has the Parthenon, has the Erechtheum, has the Propylaea, and has the Temple of Nike on it that we looked at. Archaic sculpture. Let's do this. All right, archaic sculpture. You remember that is the Kouros and the Kore. Very stoic poses. The left foot forward, the fist attached to the sides, the archaic smile. And there is the archaic smile. You should know what the archaic smile is. Atlantid. I very briefly touched on this during the lectures. Most likely, this is a non-answer in the test, but the Atlantid is the male version of a caryatid. A caryatid is a column in the shape of a woman. An Atlantid is the column in the shape of a man. There's black figure vase painting. There's red figure vase painting. Know the difference. Black figure is the people and the things are in black with a red or orange background. The red figure, the things or the people are in red with a black background. Black figure, think of Ajax and Achilles playing the dice game. That was black figure. With red figure, think of Apollo and Artemis shooting the children of Niobe. That was red figure. I want you to know the bronze casting technique. When you're making a bronze statue, what do you make it out of first? It's not marble. It's not clay. It's wax. All right, make it out of wax first. Then you're going to cover it in plaster. You heat it up. The wax melts and goes out the tubes. Then you fill in the tubes with molten bronze. When that cools, you take away the plaster and voila, a bronze sculpture. I want you to know what a cella is. A cella is the inner part of the temple. It's the part that has the sculpture in it. It is the main room of a temple. In the Greek art that we looked at, the cella had the large, giant cult statue. So you remember in the Parthenon, there was Athena Parthenos. All right, this composite, when I talked to you before about, you asked what a composite was. Yes, that's what composite means in the Unit 1. In Unit 2, I didn't talk about it during class, but there is a composite column. So a composite column is a mixture of the Ionic column and the Corinthian column together. We didn't really look at it in class. We didn't talk about it in class. I think it's one of the non-answers on this test. Contrapposto. If you don't know what contrapposto is on this test, I will fail you for the whole test. I told you guys, if you learn nothing from first semester, you learn Venus de Milo and contrapposto. A Corinthian column, that is the fancy column with the acanthus leaves. And then the composite column would have a Ionic at the top of that. There will be a picture of a Corinthian column on the test, and you'll be asked to identify it. Along with that, a Doric column. A Doric column looks like a plate or a bowl at the top of the column. Entablature. I didn't talk about that much during the lectures, but that is the area above the columns on a temple and below the pediment. It's where the metopes and triglyphs and frieze are on the temple. The Erechtheum. That is one of the buildings on the Acropolis at Athens. It is the building that has the Porch of Maidens. It had the wooden statue of Athena that they would dress once every 4 years. It was the building that had the olive tree right next to it. I want you to know what's on the frieze of the Parthenon. Now, first period, they were confused about the frieze and the metopies of the Parthenon. So, on the Parthenon, along the outer columns at the top are the metopies. On one side, it had the Gigantomachy. On the other side, it had Amazonomachy. Then it had a war with the Persians. All right, those were all in the metopies, the little square pictures around there. On the inner column above that is one long relief sculpture. It looks like a rubber band. Somebody put a rubber band around the whole temple on the inside colonnade, and that's a frieze. And on that one, they had the Pan-Athenaic procession. That right there, the Pan-Athenaic procession, and that is the group of people walking to put the robe on the statue of Athena. They do that once every 4 years. And that is the first time in history that normal people are shown on the temples. It's every before and since, it's all gods and goddesses and heroes and stuff. But this is the first time that it's just normal people on that. All right, where were we? We were with the friezes. There's a frieze at the Pergamon altar. That was the altar of Zeus, and that was the Gigantomachy. There was the frieze at the temple of Nike, and that told the story of Marathon. I want you to know the influence of Egypt on Greek sculpture, mostly with the archaic Kouros and Kore. The pose of the Kouros and Kore was almost exactly like that of the Egyptian sculptures. Am I going too fast? You want me to slow down? When we get to the end, I can go back on any of the stuff that you want to. Ionic. I think there's a picture of Ionic on the test. You need to be able to identify it. A caryatid is a column in the shape of a woman. Does anybody remember the significance of the Kriotos boy? The first contrapposto, all right? The Kriotos boy is when the sculptures started coming alive. Their bodies started to move in natural ways. The Greeks were then looking at the anatomy underneath the skin and figuring out if this moves like that, then the other part has to move like this. And you begin to get that contrapposto pose. It is the first example of a contrapposto. Know what a metopy is. I was just talking about them. Those are those square relief sculptures that are around the entablature of the temple, and they are separated by the triglyphs, those three vertical lines in between each metopy. The Pan-Athenaic procession. You should know. I just talked about it. Every 4 years, the people of Athens have a long procession to put a new robe on top of the wooden statue of Athena. Know what the Parthenon is. Parthenon is the main temple of Athena on the Acropolis at Athens. The East pediment goddesses. Do you remember the three women that are leaning up against each other? They're missing all their heads, but they're wrapped in clothes, and the clothes are all swirling around them. It's from a pediment, and so they all like wedge down into the corner of the triangle of the pediment. You guys know which one I'm talking about?
The one where they're all laying down.
Yes, right. They're all leaning against each other, and the clothes are all swirling around them. All right. So on that sculpture, the clothes are showing the form of the body, but it's also hiding the form of the body. You know what a pediment is? What shape is a pediment? Triangle. What direction do pediments face? They face two directions, east and west. Know what polychrome means? The Porch of Maidens, those are caryatids. The Propylaea, we didn't talk about this much at all. This is the entrance into the Acropolis at Athens. There were four main buildings on the Acropolis at Athens that we looked at. That was the Parthenon, the Erechtheum, Temple of Nike, and the Propylaea. The Propylaea is the entrance. There wasn't much there to talk about. Red figure, I went over this already. Know what a relief sculpture is? That's a sculpture carved into a wall or flat surface. Friezes are example of relief. Metopes are examples of relief. I think that's supposed to be 1C. The Riachi warriors were two bronze statues that were found at the bottom of the ocean. I cannot remember what the where they are in the test or what the question is asking. I can't remember. What are the Riachi made out of? Bronze. All right. It could be a bronze question. Triglyph are the three lines separating the metopes. All right, and that finishes us for the Greek. Let's get into Etruscan. I did not talk about the tumulus enough. The tumulus, those are the tombs of the Etruscans. So I didn't talk about it much. They were carved out of the ground. So basically, it was the area between the tombs that was carved out and the area inside the tombs that was carved out. A sarcophagus. I did not talk about the sarcophagus with you guys. We skipped that part. And so let me just give you guys a brief, let's see. All right. So the Etruscan sarcophaguses, are it just like the Egyptian sarcophagus and the Roman sarcophagus. They house dead bodies. The Egyptians would house a mummy. The Etruscans, they housed ashes. And it was very often that the Etruscan sarcophagus would have a portrait of a man and his wife, husband and wife, on there. And then inside would be the ashes of the husband and wife. So it was very common for these to have several figures in a reclining pose or a single figure in a reclining pose. but that's what Etruscan sarcophaguses looked like. And then the temple. I think the question that I have about the Etruscan temple has to do with the top of the temple, or that there are figures on top of the temples, and they were made out of terracotta. Terracotta was popular with the Etruscans. I know I don't have the lights dimmed, but you guys can see the figures on top of the temples. All right. Come on. No, come on. No, don't want to do that. Come on. All right. And the Tomb of Reliefs, I don't remember if I went over that with you guys. The Tomb of the Reliefs, inside this tomb, they had carved out relief sculptures of everything that the person would need in the afterlife. Do you remember in King Tut's tomb, the actual things that he needed for the afterlife were in there? In the Etruscan tomb, they carved rope, they carved shovels and picks and food and things that they would need in the afterlife. I just talked about terracotta with the Etruscans. They liked terracotta, the material. Terracotta is that reddish clay. All right, Roman. The apotheosis of Antoninus Pius is on the test. Apotheosis means being carried to heaven, right? It's the ascent into heaven. Do you remember the base of the column? And it had the husband and wife being carried by that winged guy. It was called a genius. And then in the lower right hand corner was Rome. And in the lower left hand corner was a guy with an obelisk. All right. That's the sculpture that this is referring to. Apotheosis means ascent into heaven. All right. What was the main Roman building material that we still use today? Concrete. Yes. I want you to know the 4 Roman painting styles. As a reminder, the first painting style, they were just trying to make their walls look expensive. They had concrete walls, brick walls, that's cheap. But to make themselves look rich, they would paint over it and make it look like marble, expensive marble. That was the first painting style. The second painting style is they made their walls look like architecture. They would paint columns, they would paint doors, doorways. They would paint windows to look out onto the buildings. And they also painted still lifes to make it look like there was more going on, because the walls are boring and they don't really have windows because they're trying to isolate themselves from the craziness outside. So they try to make it look like you can look out there. The third style. Do you remember when they had those tiny little pictures and it was either black or red and then they had the thin little lines around it? That's the third style. And then the fourth style mixes all of that together. The term coffering is on the test. And I think that coffering is one of the questions. Uh, Coffering is when they have a big arch that is heavy or a big dome that is heavy. And so they cut out little parts into that dome or arch to make the ceiling and the roof be lighter so it doesn't cave in. In the Pantheon, it was squares. Remember that in the ceiling? And in the Basilica Nova, it was either hexagons or octagons that were up in the ceiling that made it lighter. And I believe it's tetrarchy, not tetrarchy. But the tetrarchy is when Rome or the Roman Empire was divided up into 4 emperors and 4 areas. They were trying to stop the continuous civil war, so they divided up into 4 areas so they could respond to things quicker. And guess what that made? More civil wars. So I want you to know what a basilica is. It is a large governmental building used for governmental purposes. It was a law court in there. It would be a large rectangular building with colonnades on the inside and a clear story to allow light in. There would be an apse at one end. Sometimes there would be apses at opposite ends. Trajan's column. There's a question about Trajan's column. And Trajan's column tells the story of the conquest of the Dacians, Dacians. The groin vault and the barrel vault go hand in hand. You can't have a groin vault without a barrel vault. Barrel vault looks like somebody took a barrel, cut it down the middle, turned it on its side, and that's the ceiling all the way down. It's an arch that continues all the way down the hallway. A groin vault is you take one of those hallways and intersect it with another one at a perpendicular angle. That makes a groin vault. The groin vaults push the gravity off to the sides. The cuirass of Augustus Prima Porta. Augustus Prima Porta is the statue of Augustus Caesar with his arm out. He has a little cupid by his leg. And just last period, I was starting to make the story of Aeneas that Cupid refers to. So next year there'll be a story time associated with that sculpture. There's just not enough story time in Roman art. All right. The characteristics of late Roman art. Yes. And we call that iconic. There's the realism of the Roman Republic. That is very early Rome. And then after that, with the statue of Augustus Prima Porta, that was idealistic. They showed the figures as godlike. They were perfect. It was idealized, the perfect proportions to make them look like gods. And then at the end of the Roman Empire, they look abstract. They look cartoonish. That's called iconic. All right, these 4 go together. The oculus, the portico, the rotunda, and the Pantheon. Everybody knows what the Pantheon is, right? You should know what the Pantheon is. What's the main feature of the Pantheon? Starts with a D. The dome, all right? It's that temple that has the dome. The oculus is the hole at the top of the dome. The portico is the front entrance area. The rotunda is the cylinder section of that temple. And I forget what the actual question was of that, but I know that you need to know the parts of the pantheon. What made Constantine so special? Why is he so important? He made Christianity legal. And what that means in art history is that made it so that Christians could start making art. We start seeing art of Christianity. So, yeah, the question about Constantine, and I think it's the Edict of Milan, but he made Christianity legal. The Colossus of Constantine. You remember that big giant sculpture of him that now we only just have pieces? We have the head, we have a hand, we have a knee, we have an elbow, we have a couple of feet. And then his face is becoming iconic. It's not realistic. It's cartoonish. He's got a Peter Griffin chin. He's got eyes that look cartoonish. All right, and that takes care of Roman art. And then finally, late antiquity. We didn't spend much time on late antiquity. So, the characteristics of late antique art is that it is iconic, it's abstract, it's stoic, like the figures don't move freely. The one realistic sculpture that we looked at, you remember Christ as the Good Shepherd, that was realistic? That was an anomaly in late antique art. All the other ones that we looked at were very iconic and stoic and cartoonish. So realism is not the answer, or is not a characteristic of uh, late antique art. All right, the Good Shepherd. That is Christ shown with sheep. Usually he has one sheep draped around his neck, that he has went and got and found a lost sheep and brought it back to the fold. All right, he has rescued that sheep, and that's what he does for us. Lots of images of Christ as the Good Shepherd throughout late antique art. And also notice that Christ is being shown as young, he's without a beard, and this idea of this shepherd is not particularly Christian, that they based it off of Roman and Greek sculptures at the time. So they're blending pagan and Christian art together to appease everybody. The pagans like it because it looks like pagan art. The Christians like it because it refers to Christian things. All right, and there's a story. There's a question about Old St. Peter's, and so we went up and we had the field trip up to the library because that is exactly the same as Old St. Peter's. And you remember the clear story that we had in the library, and Old St. Peter's had a clear story. Old St. Peter's was built right on top of St. Peter's grave. In the 1500s, it was torn down and new St. Peter's was built, bigger and better and more magnificent than ever. Old St. Peter's was the biggest church built at that time. All right, and that finishes our review. There will be 3 parts to this test. There'll be the matching and multiple choice. There will be the slide identification, and there will be 2 unknowns. Are there any questions about anything that we've gone over? Yes, sir.
So will some of these be on the test?
Correct. So 5 of those will show up as the slide ID. 10 of those will show up as on the test that you have to just identify the style. And then the last 5 will show up as questions. However, now that I'm randomizing the slide ID, you might have multiple questions about the same, like the slide ID might be the same image that's also in the test. So it's totally random now.
I feel like over like the how do I explain it? The characters that stick out in like early, high, and late
Okay.
empire.
In the Roman Republic, what we looked at mostly was the veristic portraits, super realism. They even had all the wrinkles and the imperfections in their faces, and that's to show that wisdom and old age and experience is what is prized. In the early to high Roman Empire, it was the faces were idealized. Right? You think about Augustus of Prima Porta is shown to be a god. Like he's perfect. His facial features are perfect. There's no sign of aging. Even though he was an old man when that was sculpted, it shows him as a young man because he's a god. And gods don't get old. Gods don't age. That's all propaganda. Of course he was a guy, and of course, he's going to die, but it's propaganda because people don't see him up close. Only his immediate advisors see him up close, so they all see him from his portraits. All right, and then in the late Roman Empire, they start moving towards iconic imagery, making it look abstract. And that also is godlike. That's eternal. And I don't know if it bothers me. It almost seems like a step backwards to go to this. It's my own opinion, but it just seems to go backwards, to go from something that's realistic and then slide to something that looks a little bit more childish, that it's not as refined, that's not as, and I don't know if the schools of teaching artists how to do things were not incompetent, but of a lesser quality. Like there was just a less of an interest in making things look realistic, or the effect of the Greeks had just worn off. Maybe, in order to make something new, that you have to just disregard the old. So anything that the old did, we're going to do the opposite. But if the old make great art, we're going to make bad art. So, does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Any other questions about anything on the test? All right, I'm going to stop the video. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. Stop sharing.